Matchmaker Maria. Welcome to the Fieldswell Podcast.
Thank you, Lauren. Glad to be here.
You are a fourth generation matchmaker, founder and CEO of Agape Match. You are the host of Ask a Matchmaker podcast, and you've just written your first book, Ask a Matchmaker. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Did you always know you were destined to be a matchmaker?
I feel like everyone thinks that, but especially since I'm a generational matchmaker, but it was really far away from, my day to day when I was growing up. But the signs were there, I remember in kindergarten, setting up two classmates, one was sitting at one tree and the other at the other tree. And I needed to tell them what I knew. And I needed to make sure that the other person knew that I knew that they knew, the whole thing.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of moments like that, but it was in graduate school when I was just trying to network with people so that I can find a job one day in international affairs, because that's what I was going to grad school for.
Yeah.
That, the people that were coming out tended to be single, and then they would start dating and get married, and it snowballed into, this. And now 16 years later, here we are.
Isn't it wild? I think people see this incredible brand that you've built, but it's always amazing to hear about the beginnings. I know we met originally through our mutual friend, Anastasia, in New York City, would have been like 8 or 9 years ago.
Right.
And you're still building. It's a day in and day out. And I think, look at what exists now. There's the podcast, there's the book, there's this grand vision of what you've created. It's really incredible.
And I think the vision doesn't end. I'm still always tinkering, and I'm really inspired and motivated to teach people how to connect. There's a lot of things that are keeping us away from each other. Away from making really organic connections and relationships with each other. And I don't necessarily mean romantic. I mean, even just creating friendship, even creating, learning how to have rapport with a stranger. I'm always interested in those sort of things. And, I think with any company, there always has to be growth with your audience. And that's how I feel like I see that my audience, is experiencing certain obstacles due to how we date in the modern times. And, we're here to study it and provide solutions to those obstacles.
Yeah, it's very true. I'm sure the dating game has changed so much with technology, with social media, with everyone having this online presence. It's almost like we feel like there are a million options out there, and that it's harder to find love because relationships are seeming a little bit more transactional. Like, oh, there's always another option one swipe away.
Yeah, that's certainly like one major obstacle, like trying to battle FOMO. We even see it in matchmaking where a client will hire us and they're, they had a great time, but they still have the, well, what else you got? And it's like, no, this is it. I need you to date this person, But there's also, a ton of other obstacles, even that are generational, right? The people that are coming into dating right now, they don't know what it's like to date without a computer in their pocket. A lot of people have never been to a bar or a club where people couldn't film them and post them online. And so as a result, people are they do have their inhibitions on their sleeves, and they're not free of them. And I think back to when I was dating, as someone who's now 40, when I dated, yes, maybe I had a flip phone in my purse that, maybe took a black and white photo or a grainy color one at that, maybe. Couldn't really print those out, couldn't post those to the internet. And I do think that this, that, and plus a million other things that are kind of working against us, right? The political landscape is affecting us, like how we view reality is affecting us.
Yeah.
So there's all these things that are ultimately keeping single people single, but also keeping single people from making new friends.
Yeah.
And that's a really lonely place to be in.
I think what we all yearn for is that love and that deep connection.
Or even just acceptance.
Yeah.
We really need to put the expectations a lot lower than I think people
Mm-hmm.
realize,
Right. We hear the song, right? Like looking for a guy in finance, 6'5", blue eyes, trust fund. Like how many people come to you looking for maybe unrealistic qualities in what they're looking for in a partner, and what should they be looking for that's more viable long term?
The 6'5" blue eyes finance, that's a lot more rare, and happily, thank God. We don't have the unrealistic thing, but I think, what we try to do with any person that we set up, be it on the client side or the match side, because anyone can join our database to be considered as a match for one of our clients, is giving them self-awareness. And if you're a paying client, that is a pretty steep hill to climb after you've paid money,
Right.
because there is the wish list and then there's
Yeah.
reality.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe, as an ethical matchmaker, I need to tell my clients, hey, we'll work on this wish list, but here's a reality check.
Yeah.
And there are certain clients, I would say 90% of clients, that are like, great, love it, do what you got to do. I'm here. I trust you. I can't wait to meet the person that you think is great for me.
Mm-hmm.
But there is that 10% of clients who are like, I don't care about the reality check. I'd rather just have the wish list. You'll do it. You'll figure it out. And those can be quite stressful clients, but sometimes, we tend to
You find
manage
your
what we have
way.
to do. I think also some clients, if they go on enough dates with the wish list, they'll realize, like, okay, tell me why you don't think it's working out, and then
Right.
some of those clients, not all of them, but I would say more than half of those clients, they'll do a course correction. They'll say, okay, wait, I thought I wanted this. Like, I was recently thinking about a client actually who, he works in finance, and he felt like the kind of person he should be with should also either have been in finance or in law. He just felt like, I'm quite analytical. I need someone who, is more logic brained. I don't want anyone who studied the humanities or who studied the social sciences. Like, he didn't care for that. It was just legal, like law, like big law or finance. And, we did that. We did that for an entire contract for him. We told him, like, listen, I have other people that I think are great matches for you, but you're telling me no. We'll keep going down this track. I mean, all of these women want to meet you. So let's see if it works. But it wasn't working. And then he decided to renew his contract. And then he was like, you do it now. And I'm like, fine, you could have just said this 6 months ago. I don't know why we're renewing, but. And then, sure enough, it just so happened that, his second or third match was someone who, she was a professional artist. So she did performance art. She was, I just said the same word twice. She was a performance artist in the sense that she did a lot of paintings, singing. She was just immersed in art world. And the reason why I thought that they would be a good match is because ultimately, despite their careers, their lifestyles were quite similar. Despite their careers, their personalities were compatible. And despite their careers, they were open. Both of these people now were open to meeting the person and just sharing what their day was like, knowing that to the other person, it's a whole new world. And, they dated for a few months. It ended up not working out. A lot of dates don't necessarily have to work out, but he learned from that experience that, oh, I could be more open now. And then after that, it was just, career wasn't even part of the equation. Now I could focus on like what really mattered long-term compatibility wise.
It's almost like being open to accepting something different than exactly what we think we want, and letting life surprise us, and being open to going on a date with someone who maybe isn't what we have written down on paper.
Yeah. I mean, I see this even on my end. I'm a business owner. I'm quite entrepreneurial minded. And I do have a lot of friends who own businesses and are also entrepreneurial minded. And they'll say stuff like, especially when I meet my single friends that fit this sort of type, they'll say stuff like, I need a man they'll use words that I don't ever use, but they'll say stuff like alpha, or he's a hustler, or he's also entrepreneurial because he needs to get it. And my response has always been like, I hear ya, but what you're describing now is like a chief operating officer, not your biggest fan. And the
Right.
fact is, like, your biggest fans don't know
Mm.
anything about, your journey as an entrepreneur. They don't need to know about that. What they like is the product. And
Mm.
so, in reflection of my own relationship, my husband, when I met him, was an academic. He worked at a big university in research, and he's an engineer.
Mhm.
And, now he works for a big corporation again as an engineer, and, he's a principal scientist, and I'm so proud of him. But
Mhm.
he and I have extremely different
Yeah.
9 to 5s, and also extremely different ways we assess risk. And that's a good thing, because for me, I can admit that I can sometimes act in haste in my
Yeah.
decisions. Whereas my husband, he might take more time to calculate all the variables. And
Mhm.
how that makes us a match is that, he can
Mhm.
sometimes, and I say this in a good way, like slow me down a little bit, like, hey, maybe
Mhm.
rethink this. Let's look at
Yeah.
that list again. And on the other hand, for me, I can speed him up a bit and be like,
Mhm.
okay, let's execute now.
Yeah.
And I think that's, when we talk about personality compatibility, like that's a one clear example of that.
Mhm. Mhm. You make a good team and kind of see one another's blind spots.
Yeah, yeah. Also, I've always been against two business owners being together, because it's like, to own a business is to have a baby.
Yes,
And
it is.
that baby's going to sometimes be the priority. I'm not saying over your relationship, but like over other things, over hobbies. And if someone also has another baby, it starts
Mm.
to it's a competition, even if
Yeah.
you don't want it to be, it can
Yeah.
be, and that's really
Yeah.
hard.
I can see that. So, Maria, you have now set up over 5,000 first dates.
Yes. Yeah.
That's a high number.
Yeah, and I remember most of them.
What would you say are the main things you look for when deciding whether two people are compatible?
Off the bat, they have to belong to the same reality. And a really easy way to figure that out lately has been about like how they perceive politics. That's
Mhm.
just how it is in 2025.
Wow.
I'm not saying that they have to vote alike, but you know, if there's, I just don't think a person like
Mhm.
lately, one of the sentences I hear when I'm interviewing people is, you know, some people will say, I'm in the middle. I don't want to date someone who's extreme on either side. And that's such a spectacular sentence. I hear it quite often from a certain amount of people.
Mhm.
And I feel like those people should be matched with the same kind of people,
Yeah.
because I don't, now this is my own personal belief, I don't think there's this equivalence of extreme on both sides.
Mhm.
And if you believe that, then you should be with someone who is like that too. Like there's certain criticisms we can absolutely make about both sides, but I don't think they're necessarily like even criticisms.
Yeah.
So with that said, like I think that everyone needs to belong. Like the first thing I always think is like, are they in the same reality? Like can we look at the sky and say it's blue?
Mhm.
There are certain people that are going to say, it's orange, and those people should be matched with people that believe it's also orange. Other things, and I'm not saying that's like the first thing we look at, but it's certainly like way at the top.
Yeah. I'm sure
Um,
that's become a bigger thing due to the current climate.
it's just it's hanging. It's just
Yeah.
so dark and
Wow.
insane, because it really does limit for certain people their matches.
Mhm.
And what's funny to me about that as well is that it comes also, on one hand, I think for some people it's like super valid. I totally get it. On the other hand, it is a hanging cloud of like, well, can this person grow out of this?
Right.
What would happen if this person didn't believe in this anymore?
Yeah.
Um, and then also comes from a place, for some people, it comes from a place of judgment. Like for instance, right now, I do have a client who, he's a Republican, and he's a huge Trump supporter, wears
Mhm.
the hat and everything. And
Mhm.
he's interested in meeting women who also participate in those kinds of rallies. And there's no shortage of women like that. I actually have matches for him.
Mhm.
As I'm meeting these women, though, not all of them, but I want to say half of them, they are very judgmental, uh, even on those men. So for instance, he has a really funny podcast. It has nothing to do with politics. It's like a recap of like a funny show.
Okay.
And I've met women that are like, ugh, what a weird hobby. I don't want to meet a guy like that. And I'm like, what does that like?
Right.
He has a hobby. Like, what's the
Yeah.
problem here?
He's pursuing something that he's
Yeah.
passionate
So
about.
it just seems like sometimes we allow perfect to get in the way of the great.
Mhm.
And,
Mhm.
I do believe that there's a lid for every pot. So I'm just kind of trying to sometimes like stick those lids on those pots.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
to go back to your original question, I'm sorry, I've like completely veered off. Other things, of course, are lifestyle and
Yeah.
and how great is that socioeconomic status that you might belong to that completely influences that lifestyle.
Mhm.
We also look at sense of humor. I don't think necessarily that your intellect needs to be identical, but it certainly helps when you can laugh at the same things
Yeah.
or talk about things that are of interest to you. And but again, you don't necessarily need to have like shared hobbies. Like you don't need to be the same,
Mhm.
So I think a lot of values and lifestyle, they do revolve around your community. So we always try to learn about their community too.
Yeah, so important. How are you spending your time? What do you enjoy doing? Like, say we're going on a first date with someone.
Hmm.
How do you feel like men and women approach that differently in regards to like what they're looking for and the determinants on whether there's going to be a second date?
Oh, it's so different. If we're talking about straight dating, but I would tell you that it's the same for gay dating and lesbian dating as well. When men go on a date, the first minute is, am I attracted to her
Mhm.
enough that I'd want to have sex with her? And I'm not saying she'll let me, but like, is that a possibility if we get there? And if the answer is no, it doesn't matter how great the first date is.
Yeah.
Um, it's been my experience that there's just never going to be a second date. And this is about strangers meeting, right? Not,
Right.
your friends getting that sort of downtime with them and meeting them,
Yeah.
at your community. It also has to do with what you said before about FOMO. Like people, if they're meeting online, they are comparing them to who else they're talking to or who else they
Mhm.
swiped on. Like,
So true.
your access is what your opportunities are, right? So,
Yeah. Wow.
so that's men. And then with women, it's just really different. With
Mhm.
women, it takes like I think 40 minutes for a woman to decide if there's going to be a second date because she just wants to learn more, even if she's
Mhm.
not attracted initially. She wants to see if he's an active listener. She wants to
Mhm.
see what his emotional bandwidth
Mhm.
is for a conversation.
Mhm.
She wants to see what he thinks are important to talk about on a first date.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it's interesting because there are some men on the internet that complain about what I'm saying. They don't disagree with what I just said about men,
Yeah.
but they disagree about what I'm saying about women. It's always men. And it's like,
Mhm.
they say stuff like, no, women only care about money. And I'm like, I don't think women care nearly enough about money as way men care about looks.
Yeah. Yeah. For
And
men, yeah, right, like, for men, it's, like, physical appearance, that attraction in the beginning, and I always like to say, like, for me, it's not really that I have a type, it's more of, like, a vibe. It's the way I feel, like, the energy when I'm with a man. Do I feel again, like you said, like, is he listening? Is he asking good questions? Do I feel safe in his presence
yeah,
and
safe is a
calm?
big one. That's what we hear from all women, that like they felt safe.
Yeah.
And I think it's just so interesting that certain men will attack me online by saying, no, women only care about money. And I'm like, I, you know, I don't, I don't think that's, I think some women can care if you can afford them.
Right.
If you can afford a relationship,
Yeah, a
sure.
family someday.
Can you
Yeah.
afford the lifestyle that you're currently living? How
Mhm.
does that change with another person on it?
Yeah.
And I think that's a fair thing to say. Like
Mhm.
I remember even when I was 23, my dad said to me, never date a man who can't afford to date you.
Mm.
And it had nothing to do with money. It had everything to
Right.
do with everything else, right? Because
Mhm.
um, can they afford to give you spiritual growth? Can they afford to um, be attracted to you as life changes,
Mhm.
as your body changes? Can they be
Yeah.
attracted to like the emotional ups and downs of any relationship.
Mm-hmm.
There is this sort of like, you need to afford it in emotional resilience, spiritual resilience, intellectual resilience. Like there's all this
Yeah.
resilience that needs to be built in.
Yeah.
And, financial stuff is the easy one,
Right.
right? Oh, this is your income. These are your expenses. That's
Yeah.
easy. And, I wish more men knew that. Men care more
Mm-hmm.
about like if you make them feel safe and seen and heard
Yeah.
versus anything else.
It's so true. And I'm curious, like, how have you seen a difference change, like, in the dating world now that more women are pursuing college degrees, working in traditionally male-dominated spaces? Has that shifted the dynamic in regard to like the masculine and feminine in dating?
I don't believe in the binary terms of like masculine, feminine, and
Hmm.
dating.
Yeah.
I feel very passionate about that. Millennial women and Gen Z women were given a promise, right? The generation prior to us, Gen X, they were born into a big change, which was that women finally had access to their own money. They
Hmm.
could finally open up their own businesses. They could finally purchase a house. They were born into that. It's our parents, our boomer
Yeah.
parents, that made that change for us. They were born into a world where that did not
Hmm.
have that. But millennial women and Gen Z women, where there is more college enrollment, where women are in certain regions and certain countries are more employed than men, or making more money than men, um, that that is a natural conclusion of a couple of things. So the first thing is that women, we were told we could be anything. I am part of that generation. We
Yeah.
were told every single day, you can be anything you set your mind to be,
Hmm.
because we no longer were told that like you need to marry in order to get a bank account.
Right.
Um, and that's a really important marker, because women were held down for generations, if not millennia, because of that. And as a result, they could not meet their potential.
Hmm.
Um, and I think by gaining access to that sort of independence, we were able to like look within ourselves, right? Like, okay, I
Yeah.
can make money. Now I can also grow in other ways too. Do
Hmm.
not forget that marriage up until 1974
Hmm.
was a tool for not only, I mean, some people could have been in love. I'm sure many people were, but it was also a tool for survival, right? It was a tool to
Yeah.
get out of the house. It was a tool to gain economy.
Hmm.
And I think people forget that. So to kind of, I think what we're seeing right now, though, what I'm describing is generational, by the way, right? And it's also
Yeah.
systemic. I want you to think about how many governments post World War II in the Europe were like, okay, collectivist society, we're going to do XYZ to
Hmm.
have our town squares, we're going to rebuild, we want community. Whereas in this
Yeah.
country, in the United States, we made highways, we moved to the suburbs, we started driving, we're no longer on public transport. So we're creating all these like silos. And so now 3 generations later, we're here at the natural conclusion where women are not looking for a man to financially support them. They're looking for
Hmm.
someone who has emotional resilience.
Mm.
And then men were not taught to be emotional resilient. They were not
Yeah.
taught on how to find a mentor. They were not taught how to
Hmm.
make friends. And they were certainly not taught how to lose.
Hmm.
And so with all of these things, like what we need to do, like I'm really passionate about this if it's not so obvious, but I really feel like we can help men instead of pointing the finger at women. How dare you be a feminist? Ask men to like stop expecting your life to be like your grandfather's. That's not
Yeah.
happening.
Hmm.
And instead, you have to start making friends. You have to be involved in your community, and not
Yeah.
your online friends,
Hmm.
not gaming, not
Hmm.
Reddit chat, like very specific friendships that get you out of the house. Join a
Hmm.
backgammon club, join a
Hmm.
pickleball club,
Hmm.
uh, be a mentor to someone, or find a mentor in anything that you've ever wanted to learn.
Hmm.
And just that sort of connection, it just opens the world. It really
Yeah.
does,
Yeah.
into connecting with people and getting into a relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. Show up in real life and become part of a community.
Yeah, but it's easier to blame women
Hmm.
than to do what I'm
Hmm.
asking someone to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, I've realized, through I just finished my master's in psychology, like I don't feel like we're taught the mindset skills, the resilience in the general education system.
Not yet. I hope that changes, but not yet, because, a lot of these books were written with a very different audience in mind, an audience that did not have a smartphone in their
Yeah.
pocket.
Yeah. We're navigating the modern dating and
Right.
love and self-acceptance.
Yeah.
Let's switch gears and talk about your book, Ask a Matchmaker. Tell us what inspired you to write it now and how it kind of builds upon your podcast and existing brand.
I started now. It's funny. I had interest in a book 15 years ago. There was interest like from a publisher, and
Yeah.
I was not interested at that time because I felt like I didn't have a dating philosophy. I felt like, okay, I'm still trying to launch my matchmaking business,
Right.
and I feel like your first book is always your calling card.
Yeah.
But then as time went on, right before the pandemic, I could see that, okay, I have certain truths that I believe in that make a relationship work. I have certain truths that I believe in that help people make friends, and making friends is such a important step into finding someone, because your friends might introduce you to someone, but also your friends keep you accountable to like what you're looking for. And they can ask you really interesting questions like, what do you like about this person?
Yeah.
So it was in 2019, where I was like, okay, let me work on this proposal. And then and it took a few years.
Did it?
Yeah. But then in 2020, with the pandemic, something really interesting happened. We always had a coaching program called the Copy Intensive. And that had to become virtual, of course, during lockdown. And because it was virtual, it was quick, right? It went from being one Tuesday, every Tuesday for 6 weeks, to 3 days, 9 hours. Like, let's just get this done.
Yeah.
And in that, people were starting to have success. They were writing back to us, like, okay, I did this and here's what happened. And it started to build upon all the anecdotes and what I usually would teach in Agape Intensive. So that slowly started to become the book. And, I'm very proud of the book. I actually just recently read it for audiobook.
Amazing. I love that. I love that because you can hear the inflection and you can hear the points you're trying to get across. And since the story and like learnings and lessons are so true to you, I love listening.
I love it. And I can't wait for people to hear it. But I remember thinking as I was reading it, I was like, oh, this is a good book.
Good.
There was only one paragraph that
Oh my
as I was reading,
God.
I was like, oh, I wish I did something different in this paragraph. And I'm never going to tell what paragraph it is. Only my
Right.
producer knows. But I remember thinking like, it's just this paragraph. Everything else is like,
Oh my
I just
God.
thought it was perfect. I was like, this is because I do give in the book, I do give the history of dating for context. Like,
Oh,
how did
cool.
we get here?
Yeah.
And then from there, I start talking about my own matchmaking heritage. I talk about personality typing. I talk about, are we too different to make it work? Like we said in the beginning of this episode, like, politics has really changed a lot of things of how we interact with people. We're all in our own little bubbles.
Yeah.
And that the bubble is also not balanced by gender. And so, yeah, I do talk about that as well. I talk about how to find how, I don't think most people are picky. I think most people are really terrible at articulating what they're looking for. So I help you articulate that. That's where that comes in. And then of course I start talking about the media. I think we have to talk about the media and like the timelines that we are taught as kids that we think are acceptable, which are not, because it's fake. It's just I talk about Saved by the Bell and Boy Meets World. And it's like, these are after school specials. They're not, but yet they impacted, and even Sex and the City, like the impact that these shows have on how we get into relationships and the timelines that we think of. And it's quite prescriptive. I also give my own, like, okay, here's the timeline that I think is right. Here's what you need to know in that timeline. Like there is a sort of like, but there's no magic formula in the book. I think the book, really is about self-empowerment and feeling confident in the decisions you're making for yourself to have a life that is spectacular with someone you could possibly share it with.
We grew up with this Disney fairy tale image, right? And we need Matchmaker Maria's tips to navigate actual real love.
Yeah.
in
And I
dating.
don't, and Disney's a stretch. I think it's closer to Boy Meets World.
You
I
think
think,
so?
yeah, and I, every time I think about Boy Meets World, I get upset because I really like that show as a kid.
Mhm.
I'm not a princess,
Yeah.
right? I have never seen myself as Cinderella or Snow
Mhm.
White or whatever, right?
Mhm.
But I'm a Topanga, right? I was the
Yes,
smart
yes.
girl in high school,
Uh-huh.
and there's certain schools that I wanted to get into, right?
Mhm.
And you have a relationship with someone in high school. She got into an Ivy League school, and she basically gives that up to be with her high school boyfriend, and then they're purchasing a house. Like, it's just so
Right.
quick and
Yeah.
unnecessarily quick. But when you're watching it at 16,
Uh-huh.
it's so perfectly normal to think, oh, I'll get married by 22.
Yep. Yep.
I see Topanga. I know the middle class
Mhm.
Boy Meets World family that I'm currently experiencing. I know that family because it's my family.
Mm.
And you see that formula, it's repeats in
Yeah.
so many shows.
Yeah.
You see it in Saved by the Bell, same thing. You see it in I wrote all of these down in the book. But it just repeats itself, and it's a very interesting formula that, by the way, is not seen in a lot of countries. So I make a comparison with Greece because I'm Greek and I have more experience with that media.
Mhm.
There is no TV show in Greece that shows high school relationships the way we show high school relationships in America, and college
Mhm.
relationships the way we show college relationships in America. In
Yeah.
Greece, most sitcoms are kind of like The Office, right?
Mhm.
It's like office dynamics. And it's been like this since the 80s. Like, the sitcoms that they have revolve around people that are already married or office dynamics. No
Mhm.
one is telling a 22-year-old, fuck your studies, excuse my language, and go get married.
Yeah.
And that makes a huge
Mhm.
difference in how people think of timelines. So
Mhm.
when you look at, for instance, Greece, the average age for a woman and man to get married is something like 7 years later than the average age for a woman and man to get married in the
Mhm.
States.
Yeah.
And also the divorce rate is completely different.
Yeah. I mean, it is more time to get to learn more about yourself. I'm a completely different person now at 31 than I was at 21.
Everyone is.
Yeah.
Right. And now imagine if you married the person that you dated in your early 20s.
Right.
What,
Right.
I always say, if you're still married post 35 to someone you were with before you turned 24, you won the lottery.
Yeah.
Congratulations. Like, you're
Yeah.
very lucky, but a lot of
Mhm.
people do outgrow those relationships
Mhm.
in the 25, 26, 27 year mark.
Yeah.
And it has nothing to, no one's at fault,
Right.
right? It's just that your frontal lobe had yet to fully develop,
Mhm.
and you had yet to articulate what values matter to you. And
Yeah.
that is what's going to drive that relationship.
Mhm. Mhm. It's so true. What would you say is one mindset shift from your book that would change the way we show up in dating? Maybe it's a belief we need to unlearn or let go of.
Um, oh man, there's so many. I guess the one that's coming to me right now is that, like, every single person's an opportunity,
Mm.
and you really need to participate in the
Yeah.
world that you live in to meet great
Mhm.
people. I
Mhm.
use this one example of myself where I say, like, the people that introduced me to my husband, I had only met them 3 months before. So I'm not asking for your best friends to go find you a man. I'm
Right.
asking you to go make new friends.
Mm.
Be an active participant
Mhm.
in your local community.
Mhm.
You know, I even make suggestions of, like, go to community college and take a course in something you've always wanted to learn,
Yeah.
because you're going to see the same people every week. And
Mhm.
maybe, one of those people says, hey, let's all go to this bar after a midterm. And
Mhm.
then through those people, you get to know them. And then, maybe you hit it off with one of those people, or maybe that person has a cousin. Maybe that person has
Yes.
a birthday next week, and then you get to meet their friends. Like,
Yeah.
when you invest in your own community and how you go out in social spaces, it's like, it's limitless. It
Mm.
really is. And that's essentially what happened, because the people that introduced me to my husband, I met them 3 months before. And I invited them to my birthday party, and then the following week they invited me out to their friends, like when they
Mhm.
were going out with their friends. And when
Yeah.
I went out with their friends, I met 9 of their friends that night,
Mhm.
and I actually know all these people now, because now, of course, one of them I married, but I
Right.
became friends with all these other people as
Yeah.
time went on. And if I
Yeah.
were a single woman, um, could have worked with another person, or it
Mhm.
could have that could have been, I have now the social exercise here
Mhm.
to like replicate that with other people.
Yes. Yes, it's such helpful advice. I think shifting from this mindset of like, I'm never going to find love, it's not possible, to like, you could meet that person in like an hour at the dry cleaners, at the grocery store, at a restaurant. You could meet a new person who then introduces you to someone else. Believe in the opportunity and the potential that exists in your life today.
For
Tomorrow, you
sure.
never know when it's going to happen.
For sure. And one of the things, and I say it right in the beginning of the book, like one of the things that frustrates me the most is when people say like, just go to Home Depot. And I'm like, that's a nonsense advice. That's not, no, I've been to Home Depot. Everyone looks stressed out because they need to get the right paint color and the paints belong to mix.
Yeah.
Like we've all, and then the rest of people, contractors who probably have families, so it's like,
Right.
but instead, if you want to learn about woodworking, go take a woodworking class. Like
Mhm.
I really, one of my favorite things to do is when I go to my local Starbucks or local Dunkin' Donuts,
Mhm.
at least in the town that I live in, there's like a town paper. And we also have like a town magazine. And I love flipping through it because there's all these community-based events,
Mhm.
right? Like, from Reiki, or like a
Yeah.
song bath
Yeah.
to, going to your local board of education. And what you're doing is you're meeting your neighbors.
Mhm.
But like I said, every person's an opportunity. So maybe that neighbor
Mhm.
now has a pig roast on 4th of July. You're getting invited.
Yeah, you
You
are.
know, I've invited all of my neighbors to Greek Easter at the time of this recording.
Wow.
Like, so you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
and you go to that pig roast, like, I feel like sometimes we have to look at like, let's just
Mhm.
date like it's 1988. Of
Yes.
course, the book gives online dating tips and
Mhm.
advice. And I think online dating can be a really great tool if you use it like a tool.
Mhm.
And I do talk about that way more in depth in the book.
Mhm.
But, for the one piece of advice that I always say is just look at every person as an opportunity. That's it.
Mhm. 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 Thank you. As we wrap up, anything else you'd like to leave our audience with today?
Follow me on Instagram for
Yes.
more fun dating advice.
You are such a fun follow because you show up like unapologetically yourself and just give real advice that is so helpful.
Thank you. It's because I don't monetize my advice on there. I don't care. But I think it shows. Like I've never, like, before you mentioned like masculine and feminine, and I'm one of the few. I know they put me under the dating influencer thing, but I always like tell people like I actually have a business.
Right.
And this is just, let's call it marketing. But at the same time, I'm just trying to give really good advice. I'm not
Mhm.
trying to get people mad in the comments.
Right.
I'm just trying to give people the courage for clarity.
Yeah.
You
It's
know?
very helpful and it comes through. So Matchmaker Maria on Instagram,
Yep.
will be able to download your book by the time this episode is live.
Or buy it at your local bookstore.
Yes. I like turning the pages, but I also want to listen to you read it.
Yeah, you can absolutely. The audiobook is available on Audible and Spotify and anywhere else you might buy an audiobook.
And they can sign up potentially as clients of yours at Agape Match
That's
as
right.
the dating service.
That's right.
Fantastic. Well, Matchmaker Maria, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your story and your tips with us.
Thank you for having me, Lauren.